There's something to be said about rising up from the ashes, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and creating something that instantly saves a franchise. After the scorched earth that was Devil May Cry 2, the series was under a tight deadline, with a go-for-broke attitude since while the first game had critical acclaim, the second title made people question what Capcom was smoking. What didn't help was that after 2003, the company thought that putting out another title in the series with a year-long dev cycle that required at least one delay to put up the finishing touches would be a good idea, and even then the game wouldn't be released worldwide until 1 month after it was in Japan. It wasn't all doom and gloom, as it would seem that Hideki Itsuno was given full reign after the disaster that was the second game, not wanting his legacy to be Devil May Cry 2. Itsuno asked the higher-ups at Capcom for DMC3, this time with him being the director right at the start. But with that year-long deadline, would Itsuno and the team be able to salvage what they could from the disaster that was Devil May Cry 2?
Just hear me out. You've got nothing to lose, right?
Hell yeah, they did! Devil May Cry 3, Dante's Awakening. You know, when I started this dive back into the Devil May Cry franchise, I knew that this would be a game where things would start to get really in-depth. And yes, look at that time code. Down below, we're going all in today, boys and girls. This has been a long time coming, and with Netflix DMC's adaptation having been confirmed for a second season...
Aw, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
And me finally getting past the hell that was Devil May Cry 2, it's only appropriate that we give this game, the one that really got me interested in gaming as a whole, the respect it deserves. You see, while Devil May Cry 3 isn't what I call a masterpiece, the game certainly has shown to me that the medium is capable of storytelling, while at the same time making an enjoyable experience with combat and improving upon not only the sequel, but set the grounds for video game combat as a whole. And today I want to take you on a bit of an adventure with this game, giving my experience and thoughts on the gameplay and story, as well as a few other tidbits here and there. This isn't so much a review or a full-on analysis, though I won't promise that I won't be doing that somewhat. This is more or less giving my experience on what has been declared one of the greatest games of all time. So, grab a pizza and tune up the video. We're in it for the long haul, folks. I'm MangaKamen, and...
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock. I'm absolutely crazy about it!
If you were lucky enough not to join me on the journey of pain that is Devil May Cry 2, let me just say it wasn't good. Let's give a quick recap. Combat was weaker. The variety of weapons sucked. You were forced to use guns, a lot. Fucking infected Chopper. And Dante was oddly replaced with Plank from Ed, Ed, Eddie. To make a long story short,
that's just a piece of crap.
The game was made to be a lot easier to allow for greater acceptance in the Japanese market, but unfortunately because of this, it caused Western markets to not really support the title. You could say that DMC2 had a mixed reception, so there was a real push to make the third game amazing, even to the point where developers looked into motion capture for it. This wasn't the first time games used motion capture, but looking online you can really see how much the developers were willing to go to make this game have a lot of polish, even going so far as to have the voice actors for the characters do the actual stunts for the animations in the game. To me, this shows a level of passion and love that the developers wanted to do with their games, and it shows in the product. I'll get more into the presentation and such later, but for now, let's push start.
You've heard of it, haven't you? The Legend of Sparta?
Almost immediately when we start the game, we're introduced with a departure from the previous two titles. A scene in the rain, two men with white hair and clashing outfits fighting amongst the falling droplets, the narration from a woman we haven't yet seen, giving the explanation and setting for the story we're about to experience.
It seemed as if they derived some sort of twisted pleasure from this brotherly fighting.
The whole scene has this cinematic drive to it. The giant moon in the background, the rain falling down, but with their attacks moving so fast they're able to stop the rain from coming down onto the tower they're on top of, culminating with the brother in blue becoming victorious, signifying that he threw away his brother by slicking back his hair, removing the similarity that the two had. Having gone back and played the previous two Devil May Cry games, and thinking there was such a difference in quality between DMC1 and this game with presentation like this, it was extremely mind-blowing. This is what DMC1 opened with. Not that it isn't badass, but there's a reason why first impressions are important.
Well, wait a second. What about the second game?
Well...
And now, the legend of Sparta has been inherited by his son, the demon slayer, Dante.
Yeah, it's cinematic and it's a cool set piece, but it feels stilted, which for a game in the early 2000s is understandable to a degree. There's nothing more than it being cool, with a bored narrator talking about this badass whose personality was surgically removed by some rando producer. There's something a lot more memorable and striking about the fact that we're shown a scene from later in the game with a lot more flair and pizzazz. Most people will probably have the scene of who we learn to be Virgil in front of the moon, turning around, prepared to stab his brother with his own sword, burned into their memory. It's just that cool of a presentation, especially when we see the reflection of what's happening in Dante's eyes, ending with the screen going black in a telephone call.
Sorry, not open for business yet.
He's so cool. This is Dante. As I am sure many of you are aware, this is who will be playing for the game. A brash 19-year-old demon hunter with a love of pizza and is apparently just starting his business. This is because DMC3 is actually a prequel to the previous two games, going back before he officially opened his business. Haven't even bothered picking a name for the joint yet. As I've been alluding to throughout this video at times, one of the biggest complaints of DMC2 was Dante's personality. Frankly speaking,
That's just a piece of crap.
he was stilted, bored, and didn't have the same memorability that the first game had when he was portraying the character. While Devil May Cry 1 Dante had this flair of cockiness to him,
Are you the human, the son of Sparta who challenges the darkness for this?
Block off, Featherface, or you can stick around and find out the hard way.
it was more campy and over the top, with not the most stellar voice acting.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
So naturally, the best way to get back to that kind of persona that people loved was to go to a time when Dante was younger. And certainly not going to complain about that, just look at them abs!
Oh my god, you could grind meat on it.
We'll see throughout this game that while Dante does have his cocky nature and persona, there's a lot more to the character. But for now, we've got a customer.
Well, if you want to use the bathroom, help yourself. The toilet's in the back.
Is your name Dante, son of Sparta?
Where did you hear that?
From your brother. He sent this invitation for you. Please accept it.
I promise, guys, I'm not just going to have the cutscenes play, but just looking at this polish and spectacle on the scenes, it's hard to not just let it play and make me go, oh, this is awesome. But when you really look at these sorts of videos, as well as the passion and work that was put into them, it really makes the project stand out to me, especially for a game that a lot of people often tout as the woohoo, wacky pizza man nowadays. Not that people say DMC3 is a bad game, but a lot of people outside the DMC fanbase don't really see the passion that was put into it.
Invitation, huh? This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
It's something that you'll see throughout this game, but every movement through the choreography is extremely fluid, especially for a PS2 title. Now, I'm not saying this is completely perfect. This part where Dante's about to eat his pizza is something that always makes me chuckle because of how wide his mouth goes. But while there are a few gaffes here and there, just seeing the level of polish in these fight scenes are impressive. Though I will say, from a gameplay perspective, Dante isn't as invincible as he is in the cutscenes. But just seeing him glide across the ground, using an enemy as a skateboard, and shooting other demons with ebony and ivory tickles something nice in my brain. Of course, when you get to Dante using the pool table and billiard balls to help attack the Green Reaper-like demons, it just screams that this game is going to be over the top. Right! Time to actually talk about the gameplay, and we'll be going over a quick comparison to the previous two titles as well. Now, I don't intend on making more comparisons to the first and second game throughout this mess of a video, but this one will be important. In both the previous games, you're actually subjected to go through a bit of a walking segment, where you'll be allowed to get a grasp on the controls, moving around, attacking without any actual danger. You know, the safe route. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Hell, it's understandable for games that are new to make sure players know what they're doing. I will say it is kind of boring though, but Devil May Cry 3, it throws you into the fray quite quickly. It puts you in a box with a bunch of enemies, and this may sound like a trial by fire, but there's a number of factors that prevent it from being an unfair start. For one thing, after the cutscene happens, you're taken to the mission screen, basically allowing the player to not only jump in after a high-octane action you just saw and allows the player to customize Dante if they want. The second factor is when you do select the mission start, the enemies don't all swarm at once. The enemies we face are known as Hell Prides. They're the most basic enemy of the game. They have slow movements and attacks, so most players can move away or attack before they make a move. That isn't to say they're terrible enemies. They can be dangerous with higher numbers, but they allow the players to get a good grip on the controls. Real demon hunters use controllers. When done this way, it allows the player to get a grip of Dante's movements and attacks, and it's a safe box where the player can experiment with the buttons and not have a lot of pressure put on them. After a few waves with the Hell Prides, the game then gives the player a slightly better enemy, the Hell Lusts. While a little stronger than the Prides, the Lusts still have wind-up animations that are clearly defined, and as such, when they use their Reap attacks, it's telegraphed by them jumping backwards, sometimes off-screen, and they will leap towards the player to attack them. It can be a bit of a small wall, especially when the game throws more enemies at Dante at the beginning, but that's why it's thrown at the player at the very first level, telling them that the enemies won't always play fair, but you can predict their moves and either counter or dodge out of the way of them. And the final factor is this is a perfect stage for players to experiment with Dante. While I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty with the weapons or styles right now, since I'm already at page 5 of talking about the first stage, it's a small sandbox for players to experiment with the abilities that Dante can get in the game if they want to try it. Heck, if you have Trickster as your style right here, as most of the time it will be your active style when you start the game, you can do this! If there's one more thing to point out about this mission, it's that we're immediately introduced to the Red Orb system, acting as a currency for the game for upgrades, abilities, and items that can improve Dante's health and eventual Devil Trigger. Once we dispatch the enemies, well...
I can already tell. Looks like this is gonna be one hell of a party!
Overall, Devil May Cry 3's opening and first mission are probably one of my favorite ways to go about it for games. While it certainly sets the tone of it, foreshadowing a future scene, we're also shown that the game has a sense of humor to it, and allowing the players to play around with the enemies in an enclosed arena. It's fast, it's action-packed, and it's entertaining as all hell. A great start to the game. Kicking off directly from the last scene, Dante exits his office to discover something.
Damn it! You guys totally wrecked my shop. And I haven't even named it yet!
I am a little confused how one wall has collapsed when on the inside the two walls were completely intact, but I'm more interested in the bloody school bus in the background. This is a bit of a tangent while we watch Dante get dressed in his iconic coat, but there's something that's always been a debate when the games take place. Like looking ahead, we see in Devil May Cry 5 that Redgrave City takes place that's inspired by London, and I suppose people just took it like that.
Oh really?
But then again,
okay, watch this.
Why would there be an American school bus in London? And you know it's American because its door's on the right side of the bloody thing. Sorry, it's been on my mind for a while, and like I said, don't expect professional analysis and such for this video, but whatever.
And we are back.
This stage is much like the first one, where it allows the player to have a small sandbox to fight against the baddies. Notably, there are 3 noticeable additions. The first is another member of the 7 Hells, Wrath. It's a slow, lumbering demon with a huge sack on its back that will explode when attacked, or after some time it'll throw it on the ground and go boom. So unless you want Dante's ass to be caught on fire, best to keep away. On the plus side, the explosion affects the other enemies. The second is the inclusion of the items you can pick up. Next to Dante's wrecked shop, you'll be able to grab a Vital Star S, an item that can recover some of Dante's health if you enter the menu and use it. Though if you do, it will affect your score at the end of the mission. So if you see a sparkle on the ground or around, the game teaches you that it's something you need to interact with to access an item or two. And the final thing about this level is, this is the Hell Vanguard, the first mini-boss of the game. I hesitate to call it an actual boss because this type of enemy does show up again later, but it does act as a bit of a good wall for players. Not a very high one, but it does force the players to at least engage with the mechanics of the game. You see, the Hell Vanguard is relatively slow, so it allows the players to dodge the boss's attacks, which for new players is probably a good thing, and it teaches the player that sometimes attacks can be better dodged, or you can also counter their attacks. If there's one thing special about this enemy, it's that it has 2 versions of a teleport attack, one that's more horizontal and the other is vertical. There are attacks that are better to be dodged even when you're using Royal Guard, and we're not getting into the styles just yet, but the teleporting attacks will break through a normal block when you get that style. The Hell Vanguard acts as a good starting mini-boss. While I wouldn't say it's too big of a wall, that's for the next guy, it still informs the players that they actually want to engage with the game's mechanics and pay attention to what the enemies are doing. You can't just spam attacks. Once we defeat the demons, all hell breaks loose with a giant tower erupting from the ground, wrecking the city even more. This is the Temen-Ni-Gru, an ancient tower, and atop of it sits a man watching as the sun sets over the wrecked city.
It's been nearly a year since we last met. Where does the time go?
And with the Hell's Vanguard escaping, Dante begins to make his way towards the tower.
No doubt you've got some fun planned for me, right, Virgil?
The second mission does a good job of expanding on the initial steps for the player, still keeping them in a more enclosed area and showing that there's going to be more difficult challenges going forward when they play. From a narrative perspective, when you see Dante looking up at the tower and the camera pans back to showcase Virgil on top of it, there's a bit of a clever element here. Virgil looking down on Dante, watching as the city and tower becomes an arena for the two, with Dante making his way towards it. If you haven't read the DMC novels, which I don't blame people for not doing, this does set up a bit of a mystery with the players. We already know that these two are brothers from the opening cutscene, but we can see there's a big difference between the two, and we finally have a name for the one in blue. And with the thoughts of what's happened in the opening cutscene, we as the audience know that Dante is going to have a bit of a bad time, and eventually we will have to fight Virgil. And from the looks of it, it'll be a fruitless endeavor. Almost immediately, we continue our story on top of the tower, where we're introduced to the main antagonists of the game, Virgil and Arkham. We're also given a small history of the Temen-Ni-Gru, of course.
Was intended.
That's none of my concern.
It's not too expensive to dive into, but we're shown 2 things. The amulet around Virgil's neck, and he's so cool. From a narrative and gameplay perspective, this establishes Vergil's level of threat. If you're just getting into the game and you had issues with the Hell's Vanguard, watching Vergil make this demon explode into dusty chunks will tell you that he's on a whole other level. To me, this is just badass. There's always been this trope where a character with a katana will make a slash next to an enemy, but the damage doesn't show until they sheathe their blade. It's corny since you see it a lot, but I enjoy it since it establishes Vergil as a threat. Meanwhile, on the ground, we see a mysterious woman on a motorcycle looking up at the tower, demons closing in on behind her. Oh yeah, one neat little tidbit is that the number of the mission will appear in these cutscenes. Sometimes they're out in the open, like with the 3 we see here, but also the number 1 in the pizza box in Dante's office. Other times it can be extremely obscure. It's honestly kind of fun to try to find where the numbers are in the cutscenes. There's nothing really more to say about that, just thought it'd be a fun little factoid to share with you guys. Another factoid is this is where Devil May Cry's actual gameplay loop begins. Unlike the first 2 stages, we're now introduced to a more complex series of rooms. In a sense, Devil May Cry as a series has elements of exploration of its world. Even in the first 2 games, there were parts where you'd have to go around the world and exploring it, sometimes even solving puzzles. For the love of God, just hit that damn thing already! To some good and bad results. However, like everything else, Devil May Cry 3 does try to improve the gameplay. Again, to some good and bad results. When you start the 3rd mission, you'll find yourself in a street, the Temen-Ni-Gru looming in the distance, a bar right in front of you with glowing neon lights. Since that's our goal, and we're facing right at it when we're starting the level, it'll make the player think, well, might as well go forward. This may seem like a dumb thing to talk about, but sometimes we need to remember there are people out there who think that splattering yellow paint is a necessity for the gamer brains to point them in the right direction. I've never been a huge fan of smattering paint everywhere because sometimes you just need to put the players in the right direction, and other times you just need to let the players discover things on their own. It's a bit of a fine line, really, and relatively speaking, I find most games rarely hit that sweet spot. Devil May Cry 3, though, it follows a pretty good method sometimes. Do enemies appear? You're going the right way. It's not a foolproof method, since you can turn around from the starting point and end up back in front of Dante's office, where you'll fight more hell baddies. Not help that there are some areas that do have respawning enemies, so it's murky. Of course, now I'm just wasting time, let's actually talk about these new enemies. These are Enigmas. Unlike other enemies we faced, they have a more long-range attack focus. They typically have 2 attacks, blue arrows and red arrows. The blue ones tend not to be well aimed, but sometimes they'll have red arrows, which can deal more damage and can be a lot more accurate, though these attacks usually appear in the higher difficulties, but that doesn't mean that they won't appear in the normal difficulty at times. Now that's something we can tell the player to go. Sometimes when you enter a room, the game will have a small cutscene that shows the door that will be sealed by demonic energy, and most of the time you'll have to defeat some enemies or solve a puzzle to get through, which the game demonstrates immediately when you enter the bar and see demonic energy blocking the hallway and a nice shiny shotgun. The game won't be so forthcoming what it wants you to do, but typically again the camera will show you what needs to be done with a vague scene. The current puzzle basically gives you just the bare bones on what to work with, but at the same time the game also teaches you the player about destructible objects in the game. While I won't go super in depth with every puzzle in the game, I think we've got bigger things to discuss, and ooh, a shotgun! Weapons in DMC3 are fun to say the least, but after we beat the first actual boss of the game, I'll go more in depth, as all I'll say now is... I got a shotgun. We do encounter a new enemy in the next area, which is a strip club, another version of the Hell's Pride. This time we've got Sloth. As the name would imply, they're probably one of the laziest of the Hells, simply because they refuse to walk. Instead, they elect to teleport and then attack you. They are slow, but they can land nasty blows. Nothing that a shotgun or Dante and a stripper pole can't solve. One thing I want to point out is, in case you've noticed, there have been cutscenes for a number of the enemies thus far. The only ones that haven't really gotten one are the Hell's Wrath and Lust. And I have to say, from a presentation level, I honestly love it. It gives each of the enemies a bit of personality and flair. The Sloths, when they appear towering over you on a balcony in a strip club, cockily setting themselves up as badasses they think they are. You got the Enigmas falling from the sky and landing on the higher ground, as far away from you as possible, and ready their pot shots while you're still stuck in the cutscenes, showing their cowardly nature. And of course, the Pride, showcasing that they're only strong in numbers, but can easily brush to the side if you're skilled enough. I'm probably reading a lot more into this than I should, but small attentions to detail like this that make the enemies in the game, even the mooks, all the more memorable. Ask anyone who's played this game and remember the opening cutscene when Dante gets pierced by all the Pride's scythes, only to get smacked to the side with Dante spinning one of their heads on his finger like a basketball. It's presentation like that that makes this game rock. After we dispatch the sloths and a few prides, we're allowed to leave the building, and with that, we're able to explore around, teaching the player that you should look around the areas and investigate. With the placement of red orbs, it leads the player to a blue orb fragment, which when you collect 4 of these, you can improve your health score by 1. You can also find a red orb crystal behind a destructible garage door, which you can smack down to get a ton of red orbs. These don't respawn when you reload the level. It's a 1 per save file. You can also find a combat adjudicator, which is a stat you need to attack with specific weapons and get a really good specific style ranking with that weapon to break it. Doing so will get the player another blue orb fragment. There aren't really any enemies here, so it's mainly to teach the player how Dante can jump and teach them that there are going to be little secrets that you have to investigate to find. Of course, we're about to hit the best part of the mission. Bosses in Devil May Cry are a bit of a work of art. Of course, that depends on what your definition of art is, and depending on your taste, you'll have a masterpiece or something that is just ugh. When you really look at a boss, you need to consider a number of factors and how well it goes into a game. From my point of view, bosses need to be able to test the player based on the knowledge they've accumulated up to that point in the game. They're kinda like tests, but unlike the tests that the old bats in your high school would give, these are actually fun. And you can tell that the mark of a great boss that it acts as a mountain that you need to conquer with the tools that the game has given you up to this point. Mechanics, weapons, and a little player input never hurts either. So, Cerberus.
Leave now, mortal! The likes of you will abandon this land!
Easy, Fido.
Can I say that I really appreciate Dante's snark here? Not to put down the original game's writing, but there's already a definite change in the quality of it. Like, let's do a quick comparison. The witty banter between Dante and Phantom in the original isn't bad exactly, with a focus on the size difference between the two, but if I'm honest, it's not all that cutting or witty. Meanwhile, with Cerberus here, not only does the banter base itself off the fact that Cerberus is obviously a canine, but also has that guise of being a thinly veiled insult behind a compliment.
Wow, I've never seen a talking mutt before.
Because yeah, a talking mutt would probably win a dog show. It just feels a lot more natural and plays off of what Cerberus actually is rather than being a big guy. Of course, not every boss has this element to them, and as we'll see, and I will say that it does hurt them. Because part of the charm of a boss is also seeing the personality within them, and how that can be reflected back in how they fight and how to combat them. Cerberus is a prime example of this. One look at the guy and hearing him howl out against Dante, you can tell he's a serious little guard dog to prevent anyone from entering the tower. And funnily enough, that's actually reflected in his boss design. You've got the obvious parts where he'll try to fight you and slash at you, but at times he'll charge forward only to get pulled back by the chains holding him. He also has this icy armor which can soften some of your attacks, but when you use ebony and ivory, or my preference, the shotgun, it can blow that armor off and make it easier to attack. Hell, the boss fight even plays into Cerberus motif, since each head has a specific attack dedicated to it. The yellow-eyed can howl and cause icicles to fall from the ceiling, and it's telegraphed pretty well because you can see the reflections on the floor where they'll land. The blue-eyed Cerberus head can unleash a huge chunk of ice that flies across the battlefield. While I don't have the footage, you can slash it in half with a melee attack or block it with a Royal Guard and get a couple of red orbs. And the red eyes black Cerberus will unleash a breath of ice on you, and if it hits, it'll freeze Dante for a few seconds. Honestly, when you look at Cerberus, this is what a lot is essential for the first boss fight of a game. And while I haven't gotten to the fact that the boss has a berserk form where his skin will turn red when he gets to 1/3 of his health, he'll stomp on the ground and have frozen spikes erupting all around him to get Dante if he's too close. I really can't do the boss justice with words, and it's something you need to play, but Cerberus really acts as a guard dog to not only Dante, but the players as well. The previous parts of the game gave the player all the tools and abilities they need to defeat Cerberus, and the mutt here acts as a real first hurdle for most players need to adapt to the game's demands. You know how sometimes you'll see an article complaining about how we need to have a skip the boss button showing up every so often? Hell, we even had one crop up this year on Kotaku, which despite the subtitle of that article saying to respond to the arguments as nicely as possible, immediately shows its true colors by being more dismissive of the arguments and generalizes them, or even misrepresents them too. While I can see some of the arguments for skipping bosses depending on the game, I inherently disagree with it. Why? Because bosses are a part of the fun in the game. To me, when a boss is designed well, it enhances the gameplay that you've already had by giving you something different that tests the tools the game gives you. It's more of an experimentation for the players to really flex what they've learned about a game and really expand upon it. Despite what some people will say akin to, it's not really important to the story, allow me to point something out with the Cerberus as a boss fight. When you manage to give him to a good portion of his health, his skin will turn red. He'll unleash those icy spikes and then say a line. It's a point in the boss fight that Cerberus begins to take Dante and you seriously, no longer holding back because he's dealing with something that, while wearing a human skin, has something more to it. Which, spoilers, ties into the themes of Devil May Cry 3, where there's more to Dante than just being a wacky pizza teenager guy. And this isn't the only boss in the game that has this element to it. There's also the fact that when you play as Dante, or any video game character for that matter, and you fight against a particularly tough boss fight, you'll be able to get in the shoes of the character you're playing and effectively go through the same hardships they do as they fight the challenges they face. This is what we like to call immersive storytelling, where the audience can feel like an active participant rather than being a passive observer. So when I put down the icy three-headed dog and get his soul turned into a weapon, it feels insanely satisfying. Cerberus as an opening boss is a gold standard for first bosses. He's not the greatest boss in the world, but he certainly does act as a great challenge for new players and old ones too. But it's a fair challenge since the game gives you a lot of time to experiment with the combat with DMC3 as well as the movement controls. Now, as I said, not all the bosses are equal, and that's a given, and trust me, there's gonna be some pretty bad choices that we'll get through.
You sure know how to throw a party.
With Cerberus put down, ready to enter the tower proper when...
Are you going to the party? What's the hurry? Didn't you get an invitation? This just keeps getting better and better.
Look, I'm gonna try to not have so much of the cutscenes playing, but let me ask you, would you prefer a dork explain what's happening on screen, or would you rather watch Dante surf on a missile? I think the answer's obvious considering that you're watching me to this point. Well, at least if you're not on your draw tablets, you'd probably realize that the same woman we saw earlier in the stage. I question how she got here after us, but then again, she's able to make the motorcycle fly through the air, so some logic needs to go out the window for this game.
Oh, really?
When we start the next level, we'll see Virgil and Arkham discussing Lady's presence, and how Arkham is supposedly going to remove her. One thing I've come to appreciate about Arkham as well as question is the scarring on his face. I'm like 99% sure that it's a graphical issue that the scarring is moving, but on the other hand, considering what Arkham is, a human who made a deal with the devil, I always interpreted it as his demonic power not being stable. It's one of those things that even if it was a mistake, it can still add some flavor. After that, we're finally given control of Dante again, and while there are some things to talk about with this level, I feel like it'd be a good time to not be repetitive and actually talk about weapon switching. A mechanic that's pretty self-explanatory where you can switch between two equipped guns and weapons. Though one thing to note is from the original game, the switch is instantaneous and you don't have to worry about being locked into an animation while the switch happens. Not to mention, as we'll see, there's a wide variety of devil arms which each have their own pros and cons. Let's take for example the devil arm CERBERUS, the tripartite nunchucks. It's actually a pretty fast devil arm and has some really good defensive properties. It's a really easy weapon to have parrying abilities and can block attacks with a nearly 360-degree swing around Dante. The problem with it though is that its per hit damage damage is relatively low, and it's a ground-heavy weapon. What I mean is that it does limit your movement slightly. Basically, it lacks the ability of air height, which is what the game refers to as the double jump. Rebellion gets this when you unlock it with 20k red orbs, and the second jump is good for dodging and even has some invincibility frames. So when Cerberus doesn't have that option as an upgrade, that does make it a little inconvenient to use, especially if you're used to the double jump to dodge or move around. Which, I suppose when you have some platforming elements in your game, it's kind of necessary for you to have to some degree. And trust me, I have my thoughts on the platforming. Point is, the Devil Arms are a great way to fight enemies and each have their pros and cons. It's a risk assessment and choice that the game gives you. Meanwhile, the guns are another degree. We've got a few options throughout the game, but with Ebony and Ivory and the shotgun at this point in the game, you do have limited choices. Ebony and Ivory have great range and can be fast. Meanwhile, the shotgun has great knockback when you're near enemies. There's just something fun about using a shotgun to blow an enemy away. We'll get to the other weapons and guns later, but we should talk about the current mission. Mission 4 is where we expand upon the previous exploration. It's not really an all-interesting thing to talk about since I don't want to repeat myself. Most I can say for the exploration in this part is that we'll eventually reach a room with an elevator and a damage wheel. But we can't use it until you break the statues on the platform. And after riding the elevator, we get another member of the Seven Hells, Gluttony. They're a lot like the Prides, but they do have one unique attack ability. They can vomit on you! I mean, that's what it looks like. According to what I've read, it's more of a blast of sand where they spew it from their mouths, which doesn't help with my immature brain thinking it's vomit. I will point out they do have access to a double trigger mode, but there's a much better level to discuss that, so wait for that. After we deal with these guys, we come to an odd room where there are both doors leading out of it are sealed, and there's just a staircase that we can go in. It's actually a pretty neat trick to people who are just getting into the game, and when you're trapped down below in the Chamber of Sins, there's a wide variety of demons spawning in a small location. I will say there will be tougher demons on this on harder difficulties, but once you break the demons, I will say there will be tougher demons in on this on harder difficulties, but once you defeat them, you'll be teleported back to the top, and the seals on the doors will be broken. Where we come to the game's second boss, Gigapede. Gigapede is one of the weaker bosses in the game, and I'm not talking its strength, I'm talking about its lack of personality like Cerberus did. But also, this thing is predictable as well. It doesn't really have any physical attacks to speak of, and will mostly shoot lightning-based moves at you, or even have a static barrier that's pretty easy to dodge. The Gigapede will fly around the stage, disappearing into large holes in the arena.
You hole? Don't call me a hole, you're the hole!
Where it essentially becomes invincible because you can't really attack the boss through walls, and it's mostly on the rails. However, when it does come out, you're able to jump on top of it and attack the demon with your Devil Arms. On later playthroughs, when you have a certain weapon, this boss is a cakewalk, especially if you happen to have a certain gun. But yeah, this is kind of a disappointment of a boss fight, especially coming hot off the heels of the Cerberus fight. You don't even get a new Devil Arm after baiting Gigapede. Still, after we defeat this insect, we enter into a new room and grab the item we need for continuing onwards, and...
Yoo-hoo! There's no need to use violence, Devil Boy. Oh, wait. Better listen to what I say, lad. This tower here is very sturdy. You see? Your tricks will do no good. No good!
Zip it, or I'll pierce that big nose.
That could be a problem. Just hear me out. You've got nothing to lose, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jester, a mysterious figure who appears out of nowhere, subtly pushing Dante in the right direction in the tower.
In order to open the door, you need to apply a little something to it first. Do you know what that is, kid? Or is that too difficult for you?
And with that, we essentially have all our players in this game all set. DMC3 has a surprisingly small cast of main characters, with some of the bosses that talk acting as good supplementary cast. Though to be honest, there's only about 5 additional voices for that, but the main actors in this play are all on stage. I think as a character, Jester is that right amount of annoying and entertaining, helped by that he doesn't stay too long for his scenes. Of course, if you're playing a certain edition of this game, then, well...
Look, brother, it's been ages, but we finally have company. Sigh. What is sigh? Well, a sigh is when...
Enough already!
I love these guys. This is Agni and Rudra, the Firestorm. It's honestly kind of weird seeing demons who actually want to be gracious hosts. Up to this point, we've had demons who just rather kill us and not ask questions. Now that I think about it, Cerberus was kind of the same way too. He didn't actually attack Dante on sight, he tried to scare him away, only to get insulted. Then Agni and Rudra are actually really cordial. They just don't know how to be good hosts, to the point where their guests will sigh loudly. It's only when Dante wants to go through the gate that they're defending that they begin to attack. And one attack it is. The two are a bit more of a defensive-based fight, with them willing to jump away from you before one of them will charge forward with the second one following up. But they're also known for guarding and will block multiple attacks until they parry Dante, in which case you'll have to attack immediately so you can clash with their attacks. It's a great idea to do so because eventually you'll be able to use this to knock out their scimitars from their hands and down them for a few seconds, allowing you to rail against them. Cerberus is actually a really good choice in this, not only because Agni is weak to the ice element the weapon has, but its attack speed makes timing counterattacks really good. Parrying their attacks is a thrill, but it's all about the timing. A well-placed stinger or a high time right after their block can knock their scimitars flying, leaving them opening for a combo. If you're running Trickster, you can dash away from their charge attacks to set up your counter, while Swordmaster players can lean into Cerberus' Ice Age for massive damage. Hell, one thing to really note is that the brothers have friendly fire turn on, which means they can slash each other. Both brothers have the ability to empower their weapons, upping their damage and allowing them to use special moves. It's generally recommended that you try to take both brothers out at the same time, mainly because if you just focus on one at a time and leave the other, if you don't play smart, you'll face their ultimate trump card.
Oh my god, it's huge.
Now that's a fusion dance that really works. This is Agni and Rudra's super form, though there was a small difference since Agni's combined form is less dangerous than Rudra's. But the mode basically empowers the survived brother and allows them to gain access to the moves that the other one had. In this case, Agni gets a move called Twister, which Dante can get when he receives their weapon, which is an elemental infused slash. Rudra's fusion form also gets a projectile attack that you can only dodge at the right time by jumping or rolling just right. It's a bit more of a difficult fight, especially in comparison to Cerberus, but this is a fight that does change things up than what you're used to. At this point, new players should still be getting used to Dante's moveset, and it tests the player's ability to handle multiple enemies, and then has players consider counters, positioning, and timing. From a visual style, Agni and Rudra pop with their fiery red and stormy blue designs, a perfect match for their elemental powers. Their constant chatter, trying to be polite while swinging their massive blades, adds a layer of charm that makes you almost feel bad for beating them. From a more thematic element, Agni and Rudra are actually based on Hinduistic gods, fire and the storm, respectively. DMC3 turns them into quirky gatekeepers, but their elemental powers and brotherly bond give them a nod to their divine origins, adding a layer of depth to their designs. Also, small fact, they were actually referenced in Ace Attorney once. I see what you're doing there, Capcom, you rogue. Getting back to their gameplay, they'll actually warn you when they're about to attack. Eventually though, when you defeat them,
No talking.
Beating Agni and Rudra nets you their dual scimitars, one of DMC3's most satisfying weapons. The fast, elemental-infused combos feel like an extension of the brothers' fighting style, letting you chain fiery slashes and windy projectiles in a way that screams style. You see, Agni and Rudra aren't just a fun challenge, they're a perfect blend of personality, strategy, and style that encapsulates what makes DMC3's combat so timeless. Satisfyingly fun. Now, let's talk about puzzles in Devil May Cry 3. While I won't go over all of them in super detail going forward, considering that this stage is basically 3 puzzles in a row, the Trials of Wisdom, Skill, and the Warrior, I'm mostly trying to be more conservative with my time on this. I say, looking at the time down below, the Trial of Wisdom has a basic puzzle, akin to an old riddle that I'm sure most people have heard of, where it corresponds to the number based on an infant crawling, a man standing tall, and an old man leaning on his cane. Basically, the numbers 4, 2, and 3, like the number of appendages they use to keep standing and moving. The next challenge, the one of skill, basically equates to don't get your ass staked on a spike coming down from the ceilings, wall, or floor. These kinds of puzzles are laden throughout DMC3, taking a page out of the Resident Evil DNA that was baked into the series from the first game. These aren't terrible puzzles, hell, most of the time they're relatively harmless, but the bigger issue I have is that more have to do with the fact that they're wastes of time. I understand why they're here, since they serve as a break from the combat, because you do need to have highs and lows, especially when it comes to action. But some of these puzzles are barely even puzzles, especially for a game that's rated M for mature. I would think that you understand that I'm an adult playing this. I'm not saying I'm looking for brain age level puzzles, but I would have preferred some other means of puzzles that can be tied into the combat. Specifically, the only one I really say I enjoyed in this level does tie into the Trial of the Warrior, where in order to get to the item you need here, you need to defeat an assortment of 7 hells. But there's a twist. The enemies now have access to Devil Trigger modes. These enemies become a bit harder to damage, they can block your attacks, and will increase their aggressiveness too. So in order to defeat them, you need to activate both damage wheels on either side of the room in order to temporarily stop their Devil Trigger modes. It's an interesting idea, but one that isn't really used again in the game, but I wouldn't be opposed if there were changes in combat where the battles become puzzles in of themselves. Combat can be a puzzle itself, especially when it comes to the bosses, since while you can brute force your way through some of the big monsters, you'll probably get your tail handed to you real quick. After you get the puzzles done, you can continue after finishing 2 of them, but with the third, we get our third gun in the game, Artemis. I don't typically use Artemis when I play the game, but that doesn't mean it's not a handy little demonic gun. It fires arrows of energy that will follow a target until hitting them. However, because of this, it has a cooldown period. But to compensate for that, Artemis has a charging feature that will lock onto multiple enemies and fire more arrows. The attacks can also leave the enemies flinched, and can leave them stunned for a much longer amount of time than most other weapons. Like I said, it's not a bad gun, but it's not one I personally use through my playthroughs. Now watch as several hundred commenters show up and tell me, oh, you don't use the Artemis technique. Which, you know, that'll be fun.
Well, well. You've grown stronger.
Go to hell.
You point a gun at me? Your own kin? Your dear papa?
The only family I ever had was my mother. And she's dead!
So yeah, we're getting a bit more context between the 2 major characters, Arkham and Lady, revealing that Arkham is not only her father, but also the man who killed her mother. We also get to see the raw emotions from Lady, seeing her own personal stakes and how it can really contrast from Dante's motivations. This scene also shows Arkham as an antagonist, showcasing his level of threat by casually throwing Lady off the side of a tower, and that he's got a bit of theatrical side to him. I wonder if that'll mean anything. And it's one of the few scenes we get when it comes to the themes of the game, the struggle of human resolve against overwhelming evil. Again, setting up parallels with Dante's own journey and how those paths will cross. Of course, with Lady falling off the side of the tower, that's gonna be a real nasty mess to clean up.
Well, this is my kind of rain. No wonder the sky looks so funny today.
Let me go!
Let you go? But it would be a waste if you ended up as just a pretty stain.
Don't worry folks, 'tis only a flesh wound on Dante.
Here I am trying to help you, and you show your thanks by shooting me?
Well, 2 flesh wounds. Honestly, when someone walks away with 2 pieces of lead in their head and still able to drop some sarcasm, it's pretty safe to assume that Dante isn't your average Joe. Of course, we as the player know that, but it's really just sinking in with Lady.
Here I am trying to help you, and you show your thanks by shooting me? Whatever. Do as you please.
So he's a demon too.
You're just now coming to that conclusion? If that was the case, you didn't seem hesitant to want to kill him now and then before with your missile.
Are you going to the party? What's the hurry? Didn't you get an invitation?
So it's a little hard for me to understand why the lady would just now say that line. I can understand having tunnel vision and being driven by revenge. Hell, I would also understand considering that this tower is full of demons, not all of them are one-to-one with each other that you aren't trusting. But I don't know, it just feels weird that you would shoot the guy who looks human in the head twice. Maybe it's just like Dante says.
I'm beginning to think I've got rotten luck with women.
It's at this point I'll probably be skipping around a few things, not only due to the fact that I want to get to the next section ASAP, but also for the fact that I don't want to waste too much time and mine. I say as I'm on page 32 of this very script. So, I'll bring up two things to note for this chapter. The introduction of a few enemies. The first two are the Damned Pawns. They're part of another family of demons which, if the name didn't give it away, are based upon chess pieces. Pawns are the weakest of the chessmen, and as such they can only move forward one space and then attack with uncrossing swords, which are telegraphed by the color of the blades changing. They do have a bit of endurance because of their stony features, but otherwise they aren't all that threatening. But the other important enemy is this one. This is the final member of the 7 Hells. Meet Greed. Unlike the other Hells, this one is wired quite differently. Although they can't attack the player directly unless you move Dante in the way of its swinging giant coffin around, the Greed possesses the ability to summon out other members of the 7 Hells to fight for it, mostly pride, sloths, and lusts. Greed tend to have a lot more health to them, and during that time they'll more than likely be summoning a small army of other demons to help mob you. Though I will say these guys in their summoning are really good at allowing the player to rake up kills for their styling levels, which I haven't talked about yet, but I will eventually. But after all that and putting some things on other things, we're finally reaching the real star of this level.
You showed up.
Now this is what I call a boss fight. Vergil. The showdown between brothers in a location the game showed at the very beginning. And really, Vergil's what I call the real first test of skill. Mainly because, like the previous boss fight, ANGI and RUDRA, Vergil has the ability to block your attacks. Hell, one thing you'll notice immediately is when you try to shoot him, he'll actively use his sword, the Yamato, to block the attacks. The only difference is unlike those two who had a more of static block, meaning you could jump over and attack them, Vergil has the ability to move around and continue his blocking. You'll have to be able to discern when you can attack Vergil successfully, and luckily it's not that hard to determine that the only time is when he's done attacking you. You'll have a brief period to actually make the attacks you want, but you can't just attack him all night long because eventually he'll regain his balance and will start blocking attacks again. Luckily you can figure out that when he'll start blocking by paying attention to a couple of signs. The first is him being knocked back a few paces and him grunting loudly. The game telegraphs that so you know when to back off from the fight. Vergil's attacks generally have 4 patterns. A combo where he first uses the sheathed sword twice before drawing it in a horizontal slash, another where he dashes forward with a slash, an upward draw followed by a downward slash, and finally a long range attack where he makes several slashes that are marked by purple orbs. This may seem simple on paper, and it kind of is, but there's also the fact that Vergil has the ability to teleport around the arena, and depending on where he teleports, it'll change up his attack. Like, if he teleports away, he'll be using the long-range slashes, or when he's teleporting next to you, he'll aim for the sheath attack or an upper slash. As a boss fight, he really does test your skills since it requires the player to actually understand the cues of the fight as well as making sure you have the right opening. And on a presentation level, I love this fight. The rain pouring down on the two brothers as they continue their battle, the moon looming behind them, the clouds covering it slightly. The atmosphere for the fight is one I simply adore, and a small, neat little detail is when you get Vergil to a low point in his health bar, his hair goes down, making him look exactly like Dante, only in blue. It's a neat little detail that it continues on to the next cutscene where we see Vergil's hair down as well. This isn't just for show, it mirrors the emotional storm between the brothers, and when Vergil's hair falls, looking just like Dante, it's a subtle reminder of their shared blood, even as they fight to prove who's superior. And then there's the music, which is just called Vergil Battle 1. Not exactly the most creative name for a song, but just giving it a listen. That pounding soundtrack with its electric riffs and driving beat amps up the tension, while every clash of rebellion against Yamato rings with a satisfying It's a duel that feels epic as it looks, with the rain and moonlight framing the brothers' rivalry. As a boss fight, Vergil's fight forces you to rethink DMC3's combat. It's not about spamming attacks, but finding the perfect moment to strike, a lesson that carries throughout the game's tougher battles and sets you up for the chaos to come. And even though you're able to successfully defeat Vergil in-game,
Foolishness, Dante.